Hi there. This is my name's Alan Whitehouse, and thank you for attending our webinar and some tips and tricks for budgeting in Excel. Let me go ahead and give you a little bit of an agenda about what we're going to do today. So, a couple things to do housekeeping as we go forward before I kind of get into the agenda. Right now, all of your phones or headsets are on mute right now. That's just to keep background noise at a minimum during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will go ahead and allow you to ask questions through the chat box on the GoToWebinar interface. So again, no need to try to ask questions as we go because we're going to keep you muted from that point of view. What we're going to do here for the agenda is we're going to give you a little bit of an overview about who we are as a company and what we do, just so it kind of gives you some background about where we're coming from with the things that we give you. We are then going to do the presentation, and we are going to then go into a series of questions and answers at the end. So, who is TrueSky? Well, TrueSky, we are developers of corporate performance management software. So what is corporate performance management software, CPM? Well, if you look it up, it's what you see below there. It is an application that helps organizations with their budgeting, planning, and forecasting needs, as well as their reporting, analyticals, and dashboarding needs. So we're an application that's designed all about that budget capture, forecast creation, and reporting back on it and getting information in and out to your individual users. Now, we are not going to be talking about our application today. The webinar that we're doing today is some general tips and tricks for doing things in Excel, kind of an educational series that we do. But I just want to let you know what our background is so you know where we're coming from when we talk about certain things. Now, who am I? Again, my name is Alan Whitehouse. And I have had about 25 years of experience working with corporate performance management software, enterprise resource planning software, accounting software, whatever term you want to use there, as well as CRM, customer relationship management software. So I've worked with a lot of different companies over the course of time. So there's probably an industry over that time. I've probably at some point worked in an industry helping clients in that area, as well as clients of multiple sizes. So, clients where, the revenue may be something 100,000, 200,000 a year in revenue, up to my largest client has been 25 billion in revenue. So I've kind of got a breadth and depth of experience here. And this is what's come together to give all of these tips and tricks as we go forward. All right, so what I want to start with is some groundwork to set the stage here within the application, just so you know when we're what we're talking about and everything else. So again, terminology, so we're on the same page. If my mouse would work here. So if I use the word budget, that's going to be synonymous with using the word plan. That's going to be synonymous with the word forecast. Okay, so although some people think forecast and budgeting are a little bit different, again, maybe that's a revenue kind of thing or a longer term forecast versus budget. Really, for the sake of this presentation, all of these kind of concepts are interchangeable. If I use the phrase template, that's going to be the same as a data input form. Again, use those interchangeably. So in this example for this presentation, that's going to be primarily Excel. If I use the word contributor, that is someone that is actually putting numbers into the system. So they're that frontline people that are putting in the budget or the forecast numbers. A reviewer is someone who's going to take that information and approve it, kind of give a yes or a no, a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and so forth. Excel is the focus of this presentation. So again, if you're using, say, Google spreadsheets to do this, you will get benefit out of this presentation, but it is definitely Excel as an application focused. And the most important thing you need to remember is your presenter, me, is unbelievably smart, handsome, and witty. Even though you can't see a picture of me, just take my word for that. All right. So one of the things I want to talk about as a starting point, and it's not so much about budgeting in Excel as it is something to think about every time you go into a budget cycle. And I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but I want to talk about it. And it's a good question I want you to ask yourself before you go into your next budget cycle, because the answer to this question is going to drive a lot about how you configure Excel. What kind of data do you capture? Who do you involve, and so forth. So why do you do a budget? And there's a couple reasons for that. First, one of the big reasons people do a budget is that answer, because we have to. Now, that seems a little facetious kind of an answer, but in many ways it is true. You budget because you have to, because you are being mandated by your board of directors to provide a budget or a forecast. You are publicly traded or something like that. You have a regulatory body that's saying you have to give a budget or a forecast on a quarterly or a monthly basis. Because your bank is demanding it to keep alive lines of credits and so forth. So you are budgeting because you have to is a valid reason. Other reason people budget is for financial predictability. Maybe you are trying to get at a cash flow projection. So we're budgeting now to see, are we going to have to draw from that line of credit in the middle of the year or not? So that's one of the reasons that you budget. You budget to understand the business drivers in an organization. So how many employees do we need? How much square footage of a warehouse are we going to need for next year? Those are the drivers of your business. So you're doing budgets for that. And people also budget to manage performance, raises, certainly in the sales world with quotas and so forth. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is, regardless of what tool you're using to budget in, before you go into your next budget cycle, whether it's a big once-a-year budget cycle or a quarterly reforecast or whatever the case it is, ask yourself, why are you doing the budget? It might be one of these reasons, two of these reasons, three or all four of these reasons. And the reason you budget today might be very different from the reason you're going to budget next year. It's kind of an evolving thing as your business grows and changes. The reason I bring this up is the answer to this question will target what kind of information you need to capture and who you need to get involved. So again, if it's to manage performance, maybe you're getting salespeople more involved. If it's financial predictability, maybe it's more the finance group. If it's the business drivers, maybe it's more the operational people. Again, so all of these kind of feed into each other. So give this some thought the next time you go into play. So the other thing I'd like to discuss quickly are the elements of a budget. And these are the kind of things that we're going to try to help you improve upon in the Excel world. Well, the first element of the budget is what I call the people pyramid, or the people pillar. And it involves their involvement, their accountability, and their time. By involvement, I mean, how involved are people in your organization into the budget? And by involvement, I just don't mean physically, how much time they're spending on it, but what is their mental and emotional involvement in the budget? The greater physical, emotional, and mental involvement you can have in the budget, the higher the quality your numbers are going to be. If people may spend a lot of time on it, but they don't care about it, that's going to affect the quality of your numbers. And again, we're going to hopefully help you with that. Accountability. Are your people accountable for the numbers they put in to the system? I work with a lot of organizations, and you'd be surprised how many people, at the end of the day, they're not held accountable to the budget numbers they put in. So if people aren't held accountable, why should they care if their numbers are accurate or not? And time. How much time do people have to work on the budget? One of the things people always say is, you've got 2 weeks, you have a month to work on the budget. But what people don't always think about is, I've got to find time to do this budget, this once a year or once a quarter thing. But during this couple of week period, I still have to get all my other work done. So it's one of the things that you have to think about, is because, if you want good quality numbers, you've got to give your people enough time to get the budget done. You got to find ways to do that, because if they don't have enough time, it's going to get rushed, or it's going to be done, suboptimally, or they're going to be working after hours, and that's just going to build resentment over the whole process, and that all affects the quality of your numbers. The second pillar is the data pillar, and things that we're going to talk about as we go through here is budgeting drivers. So not just dollars, but what is the root of this? And I'm going to show you some reasons as to why this is important going forward. We're going to talk about the level of detail that you're budgeting in, and why budgeting more detail is not necessarily the best thing. We're going to talk a little bit about how important external information is to your budgeting process and how we're going to help build that into the Excel process as you're going, as well as timeliness on certain ways in Excel, how to make your data more timely. I work with a lot of organizations, and because they're managing so much stuff in Excel and it takes so long, when you provide things like last year's actuals, they're like 3 or 4 months behind. So again, all of that affects the quality of your budget at the end of the day. And then we're going to talk about process stuff and how accessible is your budget application, whatever that is, Excel or whatever, to your end users. Obviously, the more accessible it is, the better they're going to be able to get at it. When they have time, they're going to be able to work on it more easily. How secure is your numbers? And one of the things I want to talk about is, for your security, the first thing people always think about is, are our numbers secure enough? However, at this point, I want you to also think about, your numbers can be too secure. Are your numbers so secure that you're preventing your people from getting all the information that they need to actually give you quality numbers? How visible do you have as someone that's managing the budget process? And I'm going to help you show you some ways about that, as well as increasing the confidence that you have in the numbers. Then the final things that I'm talking about are duration and frequency. So how long does it take to get through a budget cycle? And how often are you doing budgeting? So hopefully through some of this, I'm going to help you shrink down how long it takes to get through a budget cycle, which will hopefully help you increase the number of times you can do budgeting during the year. Those of you that are just doing a once a year budget and not any kind of reforecasting, you're going to get left behind in the business world. You really need to be looking at doing quarterly reforecasting or even monthly reforecasting on a rolling forecast basis. And hopefully as we go through, I'm going to show you some of that. But the key thing to take away on all these elements of the budget is, where any of these things break down, that is going to have a negative impact on the accuracy of your budget. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about your ideal versus your budget cycle. Then we're getting into some really concrete tips and tricks. So it's all going to be based around this typical versus ideal. So in the upper section, you're seeing what I see for a lot of clients that are using Excel, where they have to, every budget cycle, spend a month recreating the wheel, building all these new templates for the budgeting process. And why does it take so long? Is because they have to get data out of your host system. You've got to manually manipulate it. You got to dump it into Excel. You got to create all these different workbooks, and you're redoing that each and every time. Then you have that long section of time that it takes for your people to do input. And why does it take so long? Well, some of it is because people naturally procrastinated doing the budget. And I'm not going to be able to help you on that. But also because your people tend not to have the layouts, the formats, and the tools to help get them in and out of the budget as quick as possible. And again, I hope to show you some of that. Then we get to that purple merge process right here, where everything breaks and you're trying to bring all of those Excel worksheets back together into one comprehensive budget. And then you spend a huge amount of time tracking down broken links, bad formulas, and so forth. And by the time you get here to the end, where you have to present it to your board of directors, your regulatory body, whoever, you've rushed, mistakes are still in there, you haven't answered all the what if questions that you get asked, and then you have to go back and forth before you can finalize it. Well, what I'm hoping is to get you something like we see down below, where your templates are more reusable from budget cycle to budget cycle, where you think about some input layouts that are going to get your people in and out quicker through the process, where that merge goes away pretty much completely, but you're given more time to do analysis and strategy on the numbers. Think about all the what if answers you're going to get asked. So when you go to present it to the board, you don't have all this back and forth, you don't have all these different approval review cycles and so forth, and you can finalize your budget that much quicker. So the whole rest of this presentation is going to be about moving you from the upper section to the lower section using Excel as best as possible. All right, so we're going to start with the create concept here. So ultimately, the better you are at capturing data, the better your end results are going to be. So that's all about how do you create these templates for people to start working with before. So I'm going to go through a lot of things. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is what I call the golden rule of budgeting, forecasting, planning, whatever the term you want to call it is. Now, if you don't take away anything else from this presentation, this is the one thing that I want you to make sure you pay attention to and take away when you're thinking about planning for your next budget cycle, is that at the end of the day, no one likes budgeting. Okay, now, I say that as a big generalization. There are some people in your organization that will like it, but for the most part, people do not like doing budgeting. Now, why is that? There's a couple reasons. One, it's not my day-to-day job. So now people like are creatures of routine. So now I have to be asked to do something different than what I do on a normal basis. Accounting has a lot of negative connotations with it, or the budgeting does, because now I'm going to be held accountable to these numbers. My bonus may be based on how well I get to these budgets, so these numbers. So there's a lot of stress to it. I don't have enough time during the day, so now I've got to work after hours, but I've also got to juggle kids going to baseball practice or soccer practice or ballet or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of stress that goes along with it. People don't like doing budgeting. You have to accept that. You have to embrace it. And you have to remember that whenever you're designing anything in your budget cycle, whether it be the process flows, who's involved, what are your layouts, if you can keep in mind that your people don't like doing this and put in place as many different things as you can to minimize the dislike they have for it, then you're going to be far more successful. At the end of the day, you'll have less pushback from your people. You will ultimately get better quality numbers and so forth. So just remember that golden rule. Next, spend a little bit of time giving your people guidance before they start the budget. Now, a lot of times what I see is an email goes out to people, and here's your budget template in Excel, attaches an email. That's about all they get. And then they either have to search their email later on to remember some stuff, and what were the rules and what was happening. Well, one of the things, and this is so simple, but people don't tend to do it, is in Excel, just add another tab for instructions. Tell people what they need to do, what decreases are required, what increases are optional, when does it have to be submitted by, who should they ask questions to. By putting it in the body of the workbook itself as an Excel worksheet tab, it's right there for your people to refer to instantaneously without having to go back and forth. And again, this could be about what accounts they have to budget to, any of the other rules that you do. It's right there. It's easy for them to access. And again, anything you can do that makes it easier for those end users is going to improve the quality of your numbers at the end of the day. Keep it simple. So remember the KISS principle whenever you're doing budgeting and forecasting. So as an example, this is a copy of an Excel spreadsheet that I got from a company I was working with. So this is a real life example. Doesn't look too bad. I mean, the color scheme's a little off, but you can see their process was budgeting by quarter. And we've got some different areas where they're putting in some numbers and then some different shading. It's a little bit confusing, but it doesn't seem too bad as to what they're doing at a first blush. However, in order to see the entire workbook that they had to fill out, you have to zoom out to 12% to see the entirety of what they were asking their people to do. I would put to you that there is no way the human brain can process this. Now, this was a layout that was perfect for the finance group. It got them all the numbers they needed in one place at one time with, very little work. It had every calculation and so forth. But from an end user point of view, this is just insane. There's no way as an end user you could start on the left here, and by the time you got all the way to the right, remember what you would put in. By the time you're at the top, by the time you got all the way to the bottom, there's no way you could remember what you put in. There was so much back and forth, up and down, left and right, that it was really affecting the quality of these numbers. And people were just, okay, I got to take a break. They'd work on it for a little bit. I got to take a break. This is too much, right? So really the layout can have a dramatic impact on your design. So what are some things I recommend? So I'm showing you an example here. So this is just one layout, again, thinking you, but like some of these concepts that I think you should think about. So up and across the top, Excel groupings. So this has been structured to allow you to group for 3 months at a time. So rather than see all these columns across, it lets them focus. So again, less information allows people to focus more on what they're seeing at hand. So that Excel grouping allows you to expand and contract and let people mentally focus, okay? I've been very consistent in limiting the shading and coloring, right? So in this example here, yellow is input. This blue-gray color is all about doing read-only kind of information, right? So they know exactly where they have to enter. They know where they, are read-only kind of stuff. Very clear about what's the account number and the description, so they know what they're budgeting for. Up above here, anyone that opens this up knows right away this is for the admin department for my Toronto location. And in this example, they should be budgeting in Canadian dollars, and we're working on version 1 of the budget. There's no guessing, based on obscure names of Excel spreadsheets or what have you, all right? We've also, if you remember on the prior slide, we talked about giving some guidance about what increases and so forth. We've used Excel conditional formatting here to automatically highlight those accounts where they're outside of the guidance that you put in. So you spend a little bit more time here in the thing, but now they've got something clear that they can work with and they can get through. The other thing that I like to do whenever possible is build your input sheets to be one screen width wide, so you don't have to scroll left and right. Scrolling up and down is fine. The reason for that is all of us today on your mouse have that little scroll wheel, which means you don't have to move the mouse, you don't have to move your hands off the keyboard to move up and down, but you still have to do that left and right. So if you want to quickly get a glance at things, you know, having that scroll wheel functionality is great, but left and right is a little bit more difficult. So again, the actual colors that you use, the yellow versus the blue, whatever, it's up to you. But simplify your layouts for your people. Even if they have multiple worksheets they have to work on, a more simple layout will let them get their heads around it. You'll have better data. Next one, tailor the templates to your user group, to your user base, okay? Not everyone thinks the same way. So here's something that I would see quite a bit when people might budget something like travel expenses, okay? This is very much an input sheet that is very much accounting finance group focused, right? You've got your GL accounts for like airfare, hotels and lodging, meals, entertainment, so forth. And then you have the time going across the top for what they're budgeting for. All right, very much great for the finance group and everything else. But if you're a account executive who travels the country visiting clients and prospects, and you're asked to budget travel expense, this is not how you're thinking. You're probably thinking about the different trips you need to make, the different events that you're going to, or what have you, right? So what do you do if you're given this layout? Well, you're starting your own Excel spreadsheet on your own desktop, putting in things and then you're summing up those numbers and copying and pasting into here. And odds are what happens is all of that great detail gets deleted after the budget's done. It gets lost. No one else remembers it's there. Well, with Excel, there's nothing that prevents you from building templates that are geared for the user and the user group that is in using the template. And through smart linking of formulas and totals and so forth, you can still bring this back to the format that the accounting group needs to consolidate the budget. But now I've got a section where this was an example great for people that travel. So now I know I'm doing the trip and this is what I'm going to have on the trips. This is where I'm going in these different places. So again, tailor the templates to the user groups. Everyone in your organization, you know, if you're someone in operations versus sales versus finance versus HR, your brain works differently. You care about different things. So spend some time tailoring the templates that those groups use, and that will help improve the quality of the numbers that you get back from them. All right, next one, connect to your data, okay? So odds are how you're getting data into Excel today. You're going into your host system, whether that be your accounting, your ERP system. You might be running some kind of report. Maybe you've got an export type function that's dumping data in kind of a bulk format into a CSV file, maybe an Excel format. And then you're doing a lot of manual manipulation to get the right data, to group it the right way you need to, and copying and pasting all of that data into Excel. One of the things you should look at is connecting to your data. Now, this is one of the items in this presentation that probably carries a cost to you. And this is one of the items that is probably not something that all of your finance or accounting group can do, that you're going to potentially need to go to your internal IT group, depending on their skill sets, or work with a consulting firm, maybe it's whoever you supports your ERP system or what have you, and have them build some connectors from Excel into your databases. Now this can be done, happens all the time. So like I said, there's going to be a cost to this. You're going to have to pay somebody to do this, whether it's an internal cost or an external cost. But once you connect to that data directly, now at the push of a button, you'll be able to refresh all of the data in these Excel spreadsheets without having to go through that file export, all that manual manipulation, all that copy paste. And you'll be able to have data that is more up to the minute. This is one of the items where, like I said, it carries a cost, but it is probably one of the highest return on investment items you can do, is connecting directly to your data rather than doing those kind of bulk exports, manual manipulation, copy paste kind of things. Okay, now that's for financial numbers and everything else. Now, there are some things that you may be able to take into account today that are in Excel that help get you more data into your spreadsheets. And that was part of that bullet point I talked about earlier with my pillars about connecting to external data. I'm a big believer that people need to know what's going on in the world around them when they do a budget, right? You can't just think about what last year's numbers were. You need to know what your competitors are doing, what regulation is coming into play, all of this other stuff, what the economy is like, all these other things that are coming into play into the world around you. And one of the ways to do that is to, go out to the web and get information. So there are ways to connect to data in the web, in the internet, that don't require an IT professional. This is one of the things where you can hook into websites with Excel. So I had a client a few years back who wanted to always have their people, when they're doing budgeting and forecasting, knowing the most up-to-date exchange rates while they were doing the budget process. So what we did was use a feature that's called from the web to connect to data. Now, before I forget and before I get into all technical here, everything I'm talking about right now, we have a white paper that goes along with this presentation that details everything I'm talking about in more detail about how to do it and so forth. So if you'd like a copy of that at the end of this webinar, if you go ahead and in the comments ask for a copy of that, we can get a copy of that, or you can just email info@truesky.com or go out to our website, www.truesky.com, and you can find it there as well. So there's a couple different places you can get it. So we're using this connected to external data from the web. And what we did is we went out to this little screen pops up here, and we went out to a website. It's a bank website that publishes exchange rates, right? And as soon as you put that in, you'll see it brings back the information in a table kind of format right there. And then once you connect, now this data's in your Excel workbook, able to refresh and everything else. So it's just one of the ways that, connecting data doesn't always have to be very difficult. It might be, but there are other ways to connect it to get information so everyone's on the same page using the same kind of thing. Spend some time validating the data up front. I work with a lot of clients when they're going through the data review process. All of a sudden they see, did this person really mean to put in $10 million? I think this was probably $1 million, right? Or these numbers don't make sense. Or why did somebody put in text when we expected a number here? Well, Excel has a great tool called data validation. And what it allows you to do is to highlight a cell or a series of cells and determine what type of data do you allow in it. So as an example, we only allow in this cell, because you're budgeting numbers, whole numbers. We don't want cents. We just want whole numbers. And you can even say things like minimums and maximums. So you want to make sure people are putting in valid numbers. They're not going too wild on things. And then you can actually say, okay, is this just going to give them a warning or prevent them from entering in that number? And then what kind of message do you want to give back to them? So if you spend some time doing data validation up front in these creation of your input sheets, when people are typing in numbers, you're going to get higher quality numbers, but also you're going to avoid a lot of those things that cause broken links with that that hashtag REF and hashtag value. When formulas break, when you're expecting a formula and people put in text or whatever. This will help get around a lot of that. And again, it'll improve the quality of your numbers. Think about your naming conventions. This is going to feed in later on. So this is one for end users, but this will feed in later on when I'm going to talk about how do you get a better view of the whole thing. So top section. These are names that I've seen and they're probably not so good. So that first one, is that the sales budget version 1 or is that sales budget version 1? Not quite sure. Probably the sales. The next one, is that the finance budget for 2018 or is that the final budget for 2018? Again, the name's a little obscure. Is this the operational budget for the fiscal year? Not quite sure on that one, right? So down below, here's some better naming conventions. Now, again, I don't care what your naming convention is. Just always make it logical and consistent. So if you remember the template I had up before, I was doing it by department, by location, right? So I put in this one, what was the location, what was the department, what was the business process being budgeted for, and are we doing a budget or a forecast and for what year? And again, having these named the same and having a consistent naming convention and stressing to your people no renaming will allow you better insight later on as to who's done what and where it is. And that way you can also know if things are missing, if people have deleted something, and so forth. So it's just easier all around if you spend some time doing some good naming conventions. All right, now we're going to move on to the input phase, which is getting the best quality numbers out of the people who are working on the budget. So a couple things that have nothing to do with Excel. This is just a best practice with Excel. Eliminate the divide by 12 mentality of budgeting, which is the divide by 12 mentality is when you just budget for a number for the year and you divide it straight across by 12. The problem with that is what I call the seasonal dilemma. And this happens in a lot of other areas. So let's say you are, in this example, a ski resort. Okay, and we've got actual and budget numbers, and for the year, maybe this is payroll. I'm budgeting 1.25 million, okay, for this department or this location or whatever. If I do divide by 12, you'll see my budgeting numbers is very flat, and at the end of the day, I get 1.25 million for my budget. But the actual is going to flow like that because we're a ski resort, right? We have heavier need for people in the winter months and far fewer in the summer months. Now, a lot of people will ask, okay, what's the difference? At the end of the day, it's still 1.25 million. The problem is if you're using this initial budget to ultimately get you to a cash flow projection or a staffing projection, divide by 12 gives you unrealistic numbers. Great. We may not be able to make payroll here because of the divide by 12. So it doesn't give you a realistic kind of sense. So really do whatever you can to get rid of the divide by 12 mentality. It's going to get you better quality numbers. Now, the other thing that I think you really want to start doing is budgeting drivers, not dollars. So everyone in Excel I know does a lot of work budgeting dollars, especially in the sales area. But really, I want you to budget the drivers, which are like the units and the quantities. And I'm going to show you why here, and this is important. So first example. You're predicting $5 million in sales. So that's what people put into the workbook, $5 million in revenue, okay, whatever that line may be. What you traditionally sell at is $10,000 per unit, okay, which means you've got 500 units that you're going to build, warehouse, and ship, whatever the product is, okay. Now let's look at example 2. Your people still predict $5 million in sales. But what you don't know is they're planning on dropping the price to $2,500 per unit, which means now you've got 2,000 units to build, warehouse, and ship, which is 4 times the volume. So not knowing your drivers at the end of the day for your budget gives you unrealistic expectations, because if you've got 2,000 versus 500 units that you've got to build, warehouse, and ship, well, guess what? You may have to put on another production run. You may have to increase your warehouse space. You may have to put in more orders from overseas, which has an 8-week or a 12-week turnaround time. So all of these things are important to know. In Excel, it's very easy to budget the drivers. You've got a quantity, a column for quantity, a quantity for unit price, and then you can just use a simple Excel formula to get you to the revenue value. So budgeting the drivers whenever possible is very, very important. All right. Next one I want to talk about is what I'm calling budget less, budget better. First thing I always hear from people is that we want to get more detail. We got to get more information into the budget cycle. And that's good, and it's an admirable goal, but sometimes it's actually counterproductive. And I'm going to take you back to this example of budgeting more is not always budgeting better. I would like you to think a little bit differently going forward. That what you should do is think about that traditional 80-20 rule. You know, 80% of your customer or 20% of your customers bring in 80% of your revenue, so on and so forth, right? In your organization, that rule probably holds true. That you've probably got certain, whether it's your budgeting expenses at a GL level or you're doing customer level budgeting or what have you, where it's a small number of items really drive your bottom line, okay? What you should do is focus on that. Just have your people focus on those really, 3, 4, 5, 10 critical items. And all the rest, ignore. Or take last year's actuals and just copy them forward and increase them by 2%. So what you're doing is you're letting people focus on those items that are definitely material, that have a direct impact on the bottom line, and not worry about those items, say, postage expense in today's, email world. where, if your postage is $100 versus $500, it doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. All right, so take a step back and identify those few number of items that really drive your budget and have your people focus on those. Okay. All right. Along with that, spend some time capturing the knowledge, what people are thinking. Okay. I think it's really important to know the mindset behind people rather than just knowing the dollars, because not knowing what they're thinking, you have no idea if those numbers are realistic that they're putting in. So how do you do that in Excel? You use the right mouse click and add a comment, add a note, and you can do that, and people do that all the time. You're probably doing that today. The problem with this methodology is that if you've got multiple Excel workbooks that you link together to form a master budget, none of your notes roll up. So this is one of the areas where, having notes and insight into what people are thinking, the qualitative versus the quantitative, I think is critical to do a good budget. And this is one of the areas where having a budgeting application, such as ours, actually makes a lot of sense, because those kind of notes are allowed to be put into the system associated with the numbers and so forth, along with attachments, but they travel with the data. They're there for everyone to see. They roll up. So when you're trying to roll up your organization, you see a roll up of all the notes. So if this qualitative information is an important part, which I think it is, one of the ways to facilitate that is to look at investing in a budgeting application over traditional Excel. All right, a couple of things, just some general things. If you have people that are always late doing their budget, and every organization has those, you might consider treating them like you do teenagers when you're trying to get them out the door for an event. Consider fake deadlines. So certain people are always late, and that has a ripple effect throughout your organization, because if they're late, the next person reviews it as late, and so forth. So one of the things you might want to do for your people, if you have problem children, so to speak, consider fake deadlines. Other things, if you want really high quality numbers in Excel or in any application, what you should think about doing is zero-based budgeting. For those that aren't familiar with that term, what zero-based budgeting is when you ask people to budget for the upcoming budget cycle, you do not provide them last year's actuals or last year's budget. What you're providing them is a blank slate. And what zero-based budgeting does is eliminates what I call budget inflation, where all people do is take last year's budget or last year's actuals and bump it up by 2%, 5%, whatever the case may be, without actually putting any time in to think about, okay, did I even need to spend that money last year? Did I spend it wisely? Do I need to spend it this year? It actually gives you higher quality numbers. The problem is I get a lot of pushback on zero-based budgeting, and the biggest pushback I get on it is that it is difficult. And my answer to that is, yep, it is very difficult to do. It's a lot more work for your people because they have to think more about it. But how do you do this in a real world? You combine zero-based budgeting with what I talked about earlier on, which is the budget less, budget better. So if for zero-based budgeting, you are having them budget far fewer accounts than what they would traditionally do, only those 3 or 4 or 5 that means something at the end of the day, then zero-based budgeting is far easier to do. And even then, it doesn't have to be a whole thing. So you may have identified earlier on that budget less, budget better that I talked about. You may have identified 10 accounts that we want them to budget to. And of those 10, now you're going to subdivide what are the 2 most critical. And it's those 2 most critical that you do zero-based budgeting on. So again, these are what's going to give you your highest quality numbers. The other thing to get high quality numbers is collaboration, okay? People should not be working on their budget in a vacuum. So I'm working on my budget for the sales department. Whoever's working on their budget for, say, the production department, these people should be talking back and forth, because my neighbor in the next desk over might have information that I don't know about. They may know something about the company I don't know. They may know something about our biggest competitor is moving into our region that we didn't know about, right? It's this back and forth, that sharing of information. This kind of goes along with what I was talking about earlier on, is your data too secure? People need to know what's going on. They need to share that information. And again, there are certain things you obviously you want to not share, maybe executive salaries as an example, right? But the more your different people in your organization, even if they're in different departments, even if they're different levels, the more they can collaborate and talk back and forth about the budget, the better your numbers are going to be. And people that are reviewing these numbers from the frontline contributors, they should be able to talk back and forth as the budget's being worked on. So how do you do that? Today, a lot of that's done in emails back and forth. And the problem with an email is we all get way too many emails, and trying to find the right one is a pain. But two, an email back and forth with two people only benefits the two people on the email thread. So what we recommend is looking at some different online collaboration tools. Now, these are not anything that this is not our tool, this is commercial stuff. The two that I'm showing you up here are two Microsoft offerings. One is called Microsoft Teams. The other one is called, Microsoft Yammer. Kind of think of them as, again, they're collaboration tools. Another tool that you might have heard of is called Slack. So these are all different tools that you can do. And if you put up discussion boards that are about the budgeting cycle, then people can post questions. Other people can answer those questions. And then what happens is you've got this big sharing of information, and you're going to be able to benefit from the shared knowledge of the group and not just the individual knowledge in individual people's heads. Okay, final thing on the input that I want you to talk about is making sure everyone understands the distinction when they're doing budgeting between what I call action versus transaction. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of that. So we're going to talk about actions. You're planning to exhibit at a trade show in March. Okay, so we're doing the marketing budget right now. You're estimating a $10,000 total spend for the trade show. So you enter that into March because that's when the actual trade show is happening. That's the action, right? However, let's talk about the transaction side of things. Your space reservation for the trade show is $7,000, so that's due in January. The AV that you want to have set up is $2,000, and that's due in February. And then you're going to print specific marketing materials in March for $1,000. Okay? So the debate is, what dates do you use to budget? Now, there is not one right answer to this. The key is to make sure everyone in your organization is budgeting the same way, because some will think about, oh, I'm going to do it in March because they don't understand accounting. They don't get that the payments and everything else, the nature of accrual accounting and so forth. Other people are more finance-based. So they're going to think about, I have this payment, I have this payment, I have this payment. That's how I need to budget. There's not a right answer here. If you do everything in March, that's one way to tie it back to kind of an activity-based type of costing kind of thing. But knowing that if you run budget actuals in January or February, you're going to be over budget because the big thing was in 1 month. If you go transaction-based, vice versa. So getting at it, I just like to identify this as something you need to think about and make sure when you're giving those people the guidance in that first worksheet in Excel, they know what they're doing and how everyone should do it so everyone's on the same page. All right, let's talk about this, the merge process. This is when you're bringing back all those Excel worksheets back into one comprehensive budget. This is probably the biggest pain of using Excel for budgeting and forecasting. All the companies we work with, this is the biggest gripe that I get. This is where things end up delaying, where errors occur 99% out of the time, is all related to this merge. So let's see if we can help streamline this a little bit for you. So let's talk a little bit about storage and retrieval first, okay? So storage tips. 1, you should be using centralized storage, a shared drive, or a cloud service that all of your budgeting and forecasting documents are stored on. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that in a minute. Email is for email. Email is not a storage device. Why is that? Well, if I'm storing all my stuff related to the budget in email and I go out sick for a month, well, not everyone has instant access to that. You have to get IT involved. You have to reset passwords. You have to get activity. Probably not necessarily always getting backed up the way you would like it to be, and so forth. You want to make sure that people don't rename your Excel workbooks like I talked about earlier, and this is going to flow importantly in here a little bit, why you don't want them to rename things. You need to make sure that whatever that centralized storage is, you're doing backups, backups, backups. I have a lot of clients that use shared drives that, believe it or not, IT did not know they were being used for mission critical items, so they weren't getting backed up. And that's a really ugly way to find out when you lose everything because of a drive failure or something. Okay, so those are storage tips. And some of these are going to feed in just a little bit on the merge, so it's something that you need to make sure you need to know about. Also, to help improve the merge concept, make sure you protect the workbook. So one of the big reasons why the merge breaks is because people in your organization have added rows, they've deleted columns, they've added new columns, they've moved certain formulas that you're linking to, right? They do that because you've left the Excel workbook wide open. So spend a little bit of time to protect the workbook, and you can protect individual sections so they can't add rows, they can't delete columns, they can't change certain formulas. And they do that through the protect the sheet here. Now, the big thing to remember is if you are going to protect the workbooks with a password, is that really at the end of the day, you need to make sure you write the password down and at least 2 people need to have it. Because again, what you don't want to be left with is no ability to ever modify these going down the future. But once you do the storage and retrieval, where you've got everything centrally located, where you protect the workbook to prevent all those random changes that break formulas. Well, now you can use formulas to link all of your Excel worksheets and workbooks together. Now, one of the things that people don't know is that you can actually link not just individual worksheets within one Excel file together, you can actually link multiple different workbooks together and worksheets within those workbooks back to a master. So you have the ability to create a master budget workbook, right? And it can link to a dozen or 100 different individual Excel workbooks. And at the push of a refresh, it opens up and it pulls in data from all those individual worksheets. So no more trying to hunt people down, no more emailing, no more copying, pasting, everything. It's almost like having an automatic merge. Now, the key for this to work is that all of those workbooks have to be on that same shared drive. So that's where people need to work, where they need to store, because when you go to reference this, if these workbooks are on their laptop and their laptop is not on the network, you won't be able to see these workbooks to deal with your automatic merge. If you are renaming the workbooks, this will break your merge as well. So that's why you want to make sure they don't rename things. But now what this gives you is the ability to do that master workbook that brings everything up. So somebody that's managing the budget process, at any point in time, because you've got everything on a shared drive, because you have a consistent naming convention where you can see all the different departments, all the different locations, all the different budget processes you have to work for, right away you know what's there, what's missing, has anything gone missing, you know everything else. Because it's a shared drive and you've linked all of these different workbooks back to your master workbook, then you've got instantaneous, every time you open this up, who's done with their data. Is it updated? Is it refreshable? That also gives you the ability to see how the budget is working as the budget cycle goes on. All right. Now, if you really want to streamline the merge and take away all the pain that goes along with the merge process, you might want to think about investing in a budgeting, forecasting, planning application. So most of them have some form of automatic merging. A lot of them have real-time merging. And again, if you are interested in a budgeting and forecasting application that will take away a whole ton of your pains, go out to our website and learn a little bit more about TrueSky. So let's talk about the review process. And so the review process is really all about ensuring that your numbers make sense and not whether or not that your merge should work. Too many people get hung up about are the numbers complete and everything else. Really, this is after you got that merge back, before you give that thumbs up or thumbs down. So first of all, give yourself enough time. This review tends to always get rushed. And a lot of that is because you had people during the data entry phase take way too long to get their numbers in. Don't sweat the small stuff. So this kind of goes along with that budget less, budget better kind of concept earlier on. So here's an example of what I mean for that. So if you look at these items for what they're budgeting for in yellow, I'm going to go back to the old Sesame Street song. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things doesn't belong. Well, one of those things would be postage. So what we've got is a $2 million run rate on the budget here for expenses every month, yet you're having your people budget postage at like $2,000. And I've seen organizations that will debate whether spending $2,000 on a $2 million budget is too much or too little. This number would have to be, well, certainly more than 10 times, maybe 50 times greater before it becomes material in the face of this budget. So why are you spending time having people argue about this, review it, when it has to be so many orders of magnitude different before it's material. So again, think about that during the review process. All right. Make sure you decide who owns your numbers. You've probably all gotten complaints when you're doing a budget review 6 months in that someone says, hey, those aren't my numbers. I didn't put those numbers in. It's also the reason why everyone keeps copies of the budget numbers that they submit. So I'm a big believer that you should only allow your frontline people to do data entry. All the reviewers, all the way up the chain, only give a approval, a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If they don't like the numbers, they reject it all the way back down to the frontline people with why it's being rejected, and have the frontline people redo their data entry, even if you're going through 4, 5, 6 levels of approval. By doing that, what that does is ensures that everyone in your organization is on the same page. Everyone knew that numbers were being changed and why they were being changed. However, if you decide not to do that, if you want to let the reviewers and the executives later on change the numbers, especially if you're holding people accountable to it, that's fine. But you need to put mechanisms in place that allow you to inform those users that their numbers were changed, why they were being changed, and give them the ability to kind of dispute those changes and why those changes should or should not happen. So at least that way you're ensuring that everyone is on the same page and you've got that accountability that goes along with it. Make sure you spend some time understanding the context of the numbers. So again, who's putting the numbers in, why they're putting in them, what they're trying to get at. And if you've done all of your collaboration, if you've put in your data validations, if you've put in good guidance up the front, you shouldn't have any real surprises. At the end of the day, you shouldn't have one of those budgets you're going, this guy's 10 times greater than what he was last year. What is he thinking, right? If you do all the steps we've talked about, you shouldn't have any surprises. All right, so let's talk about the analysis thing, what a lot of you are probably missing now in the Excel world, and that's getting these raw numbers into actual information that you can use to make business decisions with, okay? So this is the whole point of probably why you're doing the budget at the end of the day, trying to drive your business forward and make business decisions, so do not forget that. The analysis phase is time for strategy, not review. This is not be whether or not you should be approving these numbers or not. It's kind of like, you know what? These are what these numbers are going to be. These are the best sales numbers we're going to be able to get. How do we change the business to be successful? You know, what do we increase? What do we do if these numbers are what they say they are, right? So this is not giving people go back and change your numbers. This is what you're going to do about it. These are all the what ifs that we were talking about earlier. Make sure you analyze all the content. So not just the numbers, but what's going on in the world, the notes that people put in, the collaboration boards that we talked about earlier. You got to look at all of that when you're doing the analysis to decide how you're going to guide the business forward. And don't forget, you've probably got a lot of tools in your toolkit that you may not even know about. So one of those tools that Excel has that I love, that's built in, I don't think many people know it exists, is the ability to do a spreadsheet compare, where you can bring up 2 Excel worksheets. So maybe last year versus this year, last quarter versus this quarter, version 1 versus version 2. And very quickly, it will compare those worksheets side by side. So if you've put in protection such that the formats are always the same, right away, you'll be able to know what cells have gone up, what have gone down, everything else. So it's just going to make that analysis that much easier for you on a go-forward basis. So what is the final word before we open it up for questions here? So at the end of the day, you should be aiming for simplicity in your user interfaces, increasing the functionality you're giving to your users, integrating with that source data whenever possible, doing some data validation whenever you can. You're going to capture less, but you're going to capture better. You're going to also make sure you're capturing the knowledge and do whatever you can to get everyone on the same page. Now, what are you going to get in return? Well, you're going to get increased control. You're going to get reduced administration of the whole process. You're going to get faster turnaround time. You'll get some greater accuracy. You're going to get useful information and strategic answers for your questions. And at the end of the day, you're going to have more time to think. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for attending. And if you have questions, you can now type them into the GoToWebinar. They have a question bar. So we'll open that up for any kind of questions. We will stay online here for just a little bit, and we will be available for questions. Before you drop off, again, there is a little survey that will come up. If you found this valuable, please give us some feedback. It helps us improve for the future. If you would like a copy of the white paper that goes along with this presentation, let us know there. If you have any other questions or you'd like information about True Sky, you can put it in those comments, or our contact information is up on screen. Again, thank you for your time and have a great day.